So we're going to talk about a sweet spot in multifamily, and it's the smaller multifamily. Hi, my name is Khleif, and if you don't know who I am, I'm host of the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast, which I'm blessed to say is the largest commercial real estate podcast in the world now, and we focus on multifamily only. So small multifamily sweet spot, what do I mean? I'm talking about 5 to 30 units, okay? And why is it a sweet spot? Because there's less competition. You know, the big boys, the REITs and large operators, they want 100 and 200 unit apartment complexes. They're not going to go for the small stuff. They don't bother with 5, 12, 15 unit assets. So there's just going to be less competition. Additionally, you're competing against, other individual investors or small investment groups. You're not competing against these people with unlimited pockets, with bottomless pockets rather. So again, less competition. Why is it the perfect size? Why is it a sweet spot? Well, there's just not an overwhelming number of properties in a particular county as well, or in a city. You can literally mail and market to every single property in your geographic area that you're interested in. And you can even build relationships with owners where you buy a property a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road because you've built a relationship. I've got a student that literally has bought, I think he's on his third or fourth 6, 8, 10 unit property that he bought by reaching out to owners that have owned for 20 plus years in his submarket. He actually goes and knocks on doors and say, hey, you still own that property over on whatever street? Yeah. You ever thought about selling it? I know he's bought at least 3 that way. It might be 4. So again, fantastic way to get into these smaller properties. So it's the same amount of work as buying a duplex or a fourplex, but it's more money, it's more profit. Houses and 2 to 4 unit multifamily values are based on comps. They're based on comparable sales, where anything larger than that, 5 units or more, is based on a multiple of the net income, which is something you can control. Any increase to that net income is an exponential increase to the value. And you're doing the same amount of work managing a 4 unit as you are, most 5+ units. However, again, every dollar you raise adds about $17 to $20 to the value. So that's significant. And you can do seller financing. It's very common. You're not going to do seller financing on the larger properties. I'm not going to say you're not, but it's not as common, okay? It's very common on the 5 to 30 unit apartment complexes. And you can show a seller how seller financing is just a fantastic deal for them, especially if they're retirees, because they're not going to have any tax benefits. They're fully depreciated. They're not going to put that money that they make from selling into a high-risk investment, so they'll put it in the bank at 1% interest. And if you pay them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% interest, they're going to make about 3 times a month on their payment that from you than they would from having the money in the bank. So it's just a much better deal for them. So seller financing is an awesome opportunity as well. You're going to have more flexible sellers, okay? Most of these smaller properties are owned by mom and pop sellers, individual investors and small groups, and you can become creative in your deal structure and your financing. And they don't, they're not going to need to go to a board of directors or a team meeting to sell an asset. It's just you're going to be dealing with, ma and pa. So it's just much easier to put a deal together that's a win-win for both of you. You can save time as well. When you're dealing with 2 to 4 unit properties, ideally you need to see the property and you need to see comparable sales before you make an offer. Well, assets larger than 5 units, again, are driven by empirical information. They're driven by the numbers on the deal. And with the income and expenses, you can at least start the offer process. So it saves you a little time blowing through deals that you're evaluating. Now, another thing is the turnover is less in these smaller units. In larger apartment complexes, there's a higher turnover, but tenants in these smaller properties stay for a long time. Why? Because it feels more like home to them. And remember this, your turnover expenses, when you turn over units, the most expensive part of being in this business, it's the highest expense you're going to have is when you're turning over those units. It can be very costly. So the less you have of that, the better, right? So in these smaller assets, that's a plus as well. Okay, there are a lot more potential buyers for properties this size. If you want to wholesale or flip, there's lots of different pools. There's single family investors that want to go into multifamily. It's very common. Maybe that's you. Single family investors that, are burnt out. Multifamily investors, there's single family investors who want to move up to a 6 to 10 unit, but maybe not a 60 unit. When you go to a real estate investor club meeting or a meetup, and everybody's pitching houses, you'll be surprised how much interest you get when you throw out a small apartment complex. Very desirable. So there's a lot of buyers if you decide you want to flip and wholesale. I suggest you buy and hold, but that's just my personal preference. Okay, They're easy to manage and self-manage. On a small complex, you can give a resident money off the rent to help and really be your eyes and ears on that property and show units, and you don't have to have a big staff. I'll tell you the ideal situation. I had a 22 unit down in Fort Myers, and I got a retired couple, and I gave them a free apartment. Now that size you can give a free one. I gave them a free apartment. And the guy was an old past contractor. I don't remember what trade he was in, but he was in the trades, so he can fix anything. He's one of these old guys that can fix anything. And the wife was that woman that was at everybody's business. So she's always at the window with her, looking with her binoculars to see what's going on. And I let them manage it. And as a match made in heaven, it was good for them and it was good for us. But you always can find somebody that give them some money off the rent to be your eyes on that property and to help you manage it, so you're not, doing the heavy lifting. It's easier to finance one of these assets. The local and regional banks will finance apartments, and they're easier to work with. You can build relationships with them. It's really relationship banking. You go to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Fifth Third, Chase, BB&T, you're not going to be able to build a personal relationship, but you can do it with these smaller banks. So you can get attractive financing. You can own it by yourself, or you can do it in a joint venture with one or two partners. Less money is needed, less equity, down payment is needed to buy these things. So, you can bring in a couple of partners, and, on a large apartment, you typically have to do a syndication, which is more complex. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but this is a great place to start. It's much easier. Find some high net worth individuals and go take down some of these smaller properties. Mentally, it's easier, okay? You got that courage muscle, right? You got to build that courage muscle. Everybody, I interview some of the largest operators on the planet on my podcast, and they almost all started with single-family homes or plexes and things like that. Now, I'm going to tell you, it's about the same amount of work to take down a 30 unit as it is a 100 unit, but most people are going to start with a 30 unit. It's that courage muscle thing, right? They're afraid or overwhelmed, or they, intimidated by it. So it's just mentally easier to take down a smaller property. You get a higher cash-on-cash return and a higher cap rate. Higher cap rate equates to a better price, and you get a higher cash-on-cash return. And these smaller properties have that, so that's typical. In the larger properties, those things compress. So that's another benefit. And there's really more value add opportunities. Remember, in this business, any increase to that net income is an exponential increase to the value. So if you could add value to that small apartment complex, here's why you're going to see more opportunities. Because when a mom and pop owns one of these, they build a relationship with the tenants, and they don't want to raise the rents. I was looking at a 6-unit here in Sarasota, and I actually had it under contract, and I backed out because I met all the tenants. I didn't have the heart to do what I needed to do there, which was literally they'd have to move. Their rents doubled from $1,000 to $2,000 a month, so I backed out. I pissed off the broker, which I don't recommend you do, but I just couldn't do it. I met these families, and now unfortunately I'm sure someone else did. But the point, there's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. These owners will get attached to the tenants, and very hard for them to raise the rents. So you can very often find value-add opportunities in these small apartment complexes. If you're more interested in this business, I would highly encourage you to attend one of my boot camps. That's what you'll drink through a fire hose, but then you'll know what you need to know to take action on properties like this. I'll see you on the inside.